Conversation with the Candidate continues.
Thank you for joining us for our extended online conversation with the candidate with former HUD Secretary Julian Castro. We've got our crack team of New Hampshire voters here ready to, with all of their questions in a commercial-free 30-minute format. So let's start first with Leonard Morrill.
Well, first of all, welcome back to New Hampshire.
Thank you.
According to CNN, President Trump's tax cuts are helping most U.S. taxpayers. In New Hampshire, 80% of the taxpayers have seen a positive effect. Why do all Democratic candidates only refer to the tax cuts as only being for the top 1%? We're not in the top 1%.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question, Leonard. You know, I've talked to many people now across the country campaigning and met a lot of families that actually did worse under this Trump tax cut than better. And I think especially of folks who live in places like New York or other states that this tax cut took away the ability to deduct state and local taxes, for instance. And it was very clear as well that it was a tax cut that was aimed at the very wealthy, people that were doing very well. So let's say that you have a family that's middle class, and let's say even that that middle class family paid $500 less in taxes this year. But you have people at the very top that are paying millions and millions less than they were before. And I believe that that's going in the wrong direction, that we need middle class tax relief, not mostly tax relief for people that are already doing very well. I pointed out a little earlier, for instance, that Amazon made more than $11 billion in profit, and at the same time they paid no federal tax. And there were 60 well-known American companies that made a profit but paid no federal tax. That means that our tax code is completely out of whack. It's completely out of order. And I believe in a tax code that will actually reward work instead of wealth and will provide a benefit to middle-class families. I also believe that we need to use the tax code to be able to invest in a 21st century safety net. Right? What's happening in our economy right now is that more and more people are self-employed. You have people that are participating in this gig economy, driving Uber, driving Lyft, and a lot of companies, as you know, I'm sure, are classifying what used to be employees as independent contractors. So they don't have to give them the benefits that they used to give them. That means that a lot of people don't get health care, right? They're on their own. They got to go to one of these exchanges. They don't get a retirement benefit. Well, what that means for us is that as a nation, we have to step in. I see a role, a reasonable role for the federal government to step in with a 21st century safety net. And the only way that we're going to get there is to ensure that we have a tax code that is balanced, that does not overly give away too much to people at the very top and big corporations, but expects more from them so that we can invest in all Americans.
Thanks, Leonard. Quick follow-up there. How do you help Congress rewrite that tax code and not end up with the loopholes that we always see, one way or another, for these folks to get out of it?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, we need to find a way to overturn Citizens United and get big money out of politics. That's the reason that you have all of these loopholes, because you have big interests that have the money to hire a lot of lobbyists that go and convince a member of Congress that's a powerful person on a committee to get that written into legislation, and then that ends up being on page 122 of a tax document, tax legislation. We need to get big money out of politics. In the meantime, we need to ensure that there's as much transparency around this as possible. So, for instance, one of the things that I have proposed is making Congress subject to the Freedom of Information Act. You know that if you wanted to get a look at the emails that your local city council member has sent to constituents or how they've interacted with people that give their campaign money, on official email or letters, correspondence, you can do that. Generally, if you want to get that information for somebody who is a state assembly person or representative, you can do that. But Congress made itself exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. What sense does that make, that you as an American citizen can't even get any insight into how congressmen or congresswomen are dealing with these interests that are trying to get things like loopholes written into the tax code? We need to shine the light of transparency on them, get rid of that exemption of the Freedom of Information Act, and also overturn Citizens United and get big money out of politics so that we can get a tax code that is more in the interest of American families in the middle class instead of every little special interest that has enough money to lobby for a loophole.
Next question comes from Clara Monier.
Thank you. Welcome back to New Hampshire, Secretary Castro.
Thank you very much.
With Social Security running into problems by 2035, this crisis needs to be averted. Do you have any programs that might avert the crisis?
Thank you very much for the question. I know that this is an issue that is very much on the minds of a lot of Americans. In fact, today we have baby boomers that are turning 65 at record numbers. My mother is 71, so of course I personally am concerned about making sure that Social Security is there. Let me begin by saying what I don't agree with, and then I'll tell you what I do agree with. I don't agree with those who say that that we need to scale back our commitment to Social Security. I believe that, in fact, we need to increase our commitment to Social Security. And during the course of this campaign, I look forward to proposing my own plan of how we would do that. I believe that we need to look at, for instance, increasing the payroll tax, right, to be able to fund the Social Security Trust Fund in a greater way. Because for many Americans, Social Security is everything that they have. That's all they have after they turn age 65. Right? Most Americans don't have, and my grandmother is a good example of this. My grandmother used to get a few $100s in Social Security every month. And she never owned a house. She didn't have any money that she had set aside, saved up for retirement. She had no retirement plan. All she had was Social Security. That means that we need to look at, in very serious ways, creating additional revenue for that Social Security Trust Fund. Now let me just also link this back, though, connect these dots to our previous conversation about immigration. This is one of the reasons that I believe we should take a different view of immigration from this president. We have so many people that are turning 65. We have an unemployment rate right now of 3.9%. We have an aging population in the United States. We also see a declining birth rate in our country. Now, what do we need for a healthy Social Security Trust Fund? What we need is a young, vibrant workforce, right? We've seen countries like Japan around the world that are suffering because they don't have as much of that young, vibrant workforce. Immigration is part of the answer to that young, vibrant, growing workforce that we can create in our country without taking away opportunity from our own folks here in the United States. But I see that as one essential tool to helping ensure that we're able to support our baby boomers going forward and that we have a strong Social Security Trust Fund. I see these issues as connected.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Another social media question coming in here, this one from Damian McConnell. He asks, what are your views on equal rights for transgender people?
Thank you, Damian, for that question. Throughout my time in public service, I have always been an ally of the LGBTQ community. Just specifically, when I was mayor of San Antonio, we passed a non-discrimination ordinance that included the transgender community. Some people suggested that, well, should you leave out the transgender community? We did not. We included the transgender community in our non-discrimination ordinance in San Antonio to make sure that they could not be discriminated against in our city. When I was HUD secretary, one of the things that we did is we expanded something called the Equal Access Rule. The Equal Access Rule essentially dealt with how federally subsidized shelters would treat people who were LGBT. We expanded it to include transgender individuals so that if somebody is transgender and they showed up at a federally subsidized shelter, they would be accommodated according to their preference. I don't believe that anybody should be treated like a second-class citizen in this country. Our values are to treat everybody equally the same, and that includes transgender individuals. And so I would say to Damian that I have a track record. When I was mayor, when I was HUD secretary, and as president, I will continue to ensure that we protect the rights of transgender Americans.
Next question comes from Connie Evans of Ware.
How are you, Mr. Secretary?
Doing great.
Good. How would you deal with Kim Jong-un and get him to denuclearize North Korea?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. You know, one of the oddest things to figure out is any kind of strategy that this president has when it comes to dealing with North Korea. I'm disappointed because the administration actually started off on a relatively good note. You may remember that over a year ago, they marshaled the support of other countries at the UN to impose further sanctions on North Korea to try and get them to halt their development of a nuclear weapon. Right? At the time, I and others who don't necessarily always agree with the president said that, hey, we give you credit. That's the kind of thing that you should be doing more of. And then this president went off on this wild goose chase, undisciplined, with two of these summits where he had clearly not done his homework, had overpromised and underdelivered to the American people. Remember, he said basically there was no more threat from North Korea? Well, it turns out that our best intelligence suggests that they have a nuclear weapon. There is some disagreement about whether they have what's called a re-entry vehicle. In other words, whether that nuclear weapon could successfully land in the United States and hit its target. But we can't take that chance. So here's what I would do. Number one, I would remarshal the support of our allies, of South Korea, of Japan, of other countries, to put economic pressure, greater sanctions on North Korea, to pressure them to halt any development of a nuclear weapon. And I would also recommit the United States to the Iran nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, because that set a strong precedent for how we're going to deal with nations to discourage them from moving forward with a nuclear arms program. The final thing I'll say about this and connect North Korea to this other challenge is that I believe the president made a mistake when he said that we were going to withdraw from the ICBM treaty. This ICBM treaty has been in existence over 30 years. It's between the United States and Russia. Right after he said that, Putin said that they were going to withdraw from it. It takes 6 months to withdraw from this treaty. If the United States and Russia withdraw, I would actually look for new opportunities to forge a new treaty that includes countries like China that were not included in the original treaty, but that was over 30 years ago. Times have changed. Their capability has changed and grown. Their military is growing. So we have to look for every chance to turn a setback into a new 21st century opportunity when it comes to controlling the proliferation of nuclear weapons in our world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Next question comes from Elizabeth Radisich.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm the mom of the cutest 3-year-old twins that you've ever seen. They're African.
Do you have a picture?
It's on my phone. I don't have it with me. And I forgive you for being a twin. But they're African American. And since I'm not, I do a lot of listening to African American moms to learn more about race and then share what I learn. As a Hispanic man, who are people that you listen to about race, and what are some of the key things that you've learned from them?
You know, I read a lot on different subject matters, as you can imagine these days, but Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think, has been one of the most poignant and effective writers in our modern times on the subject of race. And I'll give you an example of this. Recently, this issue has come up in the presidential campaign about reparations. Right? And a few years ago, he wrote a very compelling article in the Atlantic magazine about the history of slavery and also the effect of Jim Crow and the lasting impact that those things have had on African Americans in this country that influenced my thinking as I was asked the question about whether we should go forward in considering reparations or not. But also just people in my daily life, right, that are different backgrounds from me. Some of the best conversations I think that we're able to have are those conversations with friends that are honest, right, that are unguarded, right, where people give you their unvarnished opinion, people of different backgrounds. There have also been moments in the last couple of years that have inspired me. I'll give you an example of that. On June 17th of last year, on Father's Day, I went down to the border to this place called the Ursula Processing Center in McAllen to join a group of activists that were protesting the family separation policy of this administration. And, you know, it was very sad to see there that children were in there and you knew that they were being separated from their parents. But it was uplifting to see that the activists themselves, you know, some of them were my color and the color of the kids that were in that center, but a lot of them were white, some of them were black, some of them were Asian American. It was very powerful because it reminded me that what brings us together are our values, regardless of the color of our skin. We were there because we believed in compassion and humanity, a basic respect, and that there was a better way to do this than to separate those little children from their families. And so, you know, I'm sure that you are a wonderful mom to your boys.
Boy and a girl.
A boy and a girl, all right.
Yeah,
you have the
each.
complete set.
Yes, I do.
And their
that-
names are Grant Roosevelt and Reagan Kennedy. So
There you go. So, you know, one or both should grow up to be presidents then. Eh? But, you know, I believe that all of us have a lot to learn from each other. And I think that in the years to come, one of the things, just to bring this back to this campaign, that we will benefit from is having a president that is not so dead set on creating fear and paranoia and stoking division among us based on our background, whatever background that is, so that we can have more of those conversations and continue, I think, to repair the damage that has been done along the way.
thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next question comes from Rosemary Rung, who just also happens to be a state representative from Merrimack.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you for having me out here again.
Thank you for coming to New Hampshire, Secretary. My question is, what do you think is the most important quality for a president to have?
The reason that I take a second is because the role of the presidency is such an important role that there are many important qualities. But I would say, I have always believed that the fundamental basis of public service is honesty. I think people need to know that with your president, that he or she is being honest with you. And I'm not much into trying to make this country anything again. I want to make it better than ever for everybody in the future. But I do want to restore integrity and honesty to the White House.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up there. Let's fast forward to 2021, and President Castro is taking office. Presumably, President Donald Trump is leaving office after a single term, but he's still going to have Twitter, and he's still going to be a former president of the United States. And it's been a long time in our history since we've had an adversarial relationship between any former president and a current president. How would you deal, big hypothetical here, but how would you deal with somebody who used to be a president who is still going to be very critical of what you're doing?
You know, I have given this thought, actually, because I have thought that that his attempts to divide the country will not end just because his tenure in public service ends. And so there's also, by the way, a good book, if any of y'all have read it, called The President's Club, that some of y'all have read it, that talks about the relationship over the last 100 years or so of presidents and former presidents. And there is a collegiality that exists among them. How would I handle it? I think you just got to do the business of the American people and focus on trying to improve the lives of each American family, focus on health care, on jobs, on education, on those things that people care about. I also think that what's happening with this president is that people, even magic tricks get old after a while. When he named, you know, Marco Rubio, Little Marco, and Lying Ted, and, you know, whatever he did with Jeb Bush, and people still ask me, well, what nickname do you think he's going to give you, or what are you going to do when he gives you a nickname? And I tell them, look, what I'm going to do is speak to the American voter and tell him or her what I'm going to do for him or her and their family. Right? That doesn't mean I'm not going to stand up to Donald Trump, and I will, but I'm not going to make Donald Trump the focus of this campaign. Right? What I'm going to make the focus of this campaign is you and your family and what I would do for you if I'm President of the United States. And that goes for Donald Trump, whether he's president now or whether he's a former president. I would focus on the business of the American people and let him be the sideshow that he wants to be. And I think that magic trick is getting old by the day.
Next question comes from Dan Bergeron of Manchester.
Secretary Castro, how are you? A few weeks ago after an event, you had shared with me that your dad was an educator for several years, a teacher. And so I guess based on, excuse me, connecting the dots, as you were saying earlier, what does, education funding, what would that look like in a Castro White House? And if you could sort of just relate it to locally here in Manchester or, every city or state.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Yeah.
So, I'm a proud product of the public schools of San Antonio. My brother and I went to public schools all but 1 year. My mom had gone to Catholic school for 16 straight years, and she put us in Catholic school 1 year. And that was enough.
Yes.
But
yeah, I went back and forth as well.
There you go. My father was a teacher for 31 years, a math teacher. My wife actually taught in the classroom, elementary, for 8 or 9 years, and that she still is a curriculum specialist in one of the public school districts down there. So, I believe that to improve education in our country, we need to prioritize public education. And I would pay teachers what they deserve. I would reduce class sizes in our country. I would work to make sure that no matter what the needs of a student are, that he or she can have those needs met at the school they go to. Because I've met so many special needs parents over the years who have told me that they feel like they have to be a lawyer to advocate for their child and make sure that they get what they need from the school, and that it shouldn't be like that. So your question is, okay, well, how are we going to make those investments? To go back to the conversation about a different tax code, during this campaign, actually within the next 2 weeks, we're going to release an education plan, including what we would do to pay for it, about investing in all of the things I mentioned in K through 12 education and universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, as well as higher education. I believe that we can do that if we rewrite our tax code that's in a balanced way, that expects more from people at the very top and from big companies, and invests that revenue in education and other things that we need in this 21st century.
I look forward to reading that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Next question comes from Kim Memsheimer of Lee.
Thank you, Secretary Castro. Earlier in your discussion about Social Security, you talked about the aging population of the United States. New Hampshire is the second oldest state in the country, and we have 100,000 people in this state affected by Alzheimer's disease, 32,000 with it, and 68,000 people caring for it. If you were elected president, what would you do about the public health crisis that is Alzheimer's?
Thank you very much for the question. I've met several families along the way of this campaign, but just in life before, that have grappled with Alzheimer's, and have seen the way the way people have described it to me, turns the person into a shell of himself or herself. But also there are amazing stories of daughters or sons, adult daughters or sons, who have been wonderful caregivers. Right? A couple of things. Number one, I would invest in greater support for those caregivers. Right? That's why we need more robust paid family leave, for instance. That's why we need better tax credits for people who have to expend money to take care of adult father or mother or senior father or mother that has Alzheimer's. It also is a reason that I support robust funding into research, right, so that one day we can find a cure for Alzheimer's, and I believe that we can. I mean, if we go back, 100 years ago, think about all the things that we can treat or cure today that we never believed we would have been able to 100 years ago. And so I'm actually excited about being a president that believes in investing in science again, so that one day we can find that cure. In the meantime, I would invest in greater support for families that are dealing with Alzheimer's, because I know that this is a condition that does not happen overnight. Right? Oftentimes, somebody can live with Alzheimer's for years, and so it takes a real toll, and we need to support our families that are dealing with that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Kim. Next question comes from Carolyn Moore.
Hi. 40% of the country's voters are independents. 75% of that have a problem with the word socialism being used so much by the Democratic Party candidates. How do you plan on winning our votes?
Yeah, thank you very much, Carolyn, for that question. You know, let me just say what I see out there right now. What I see out there is a real strategy by this president to call Democrats socialists, right? And it's funny because this actually, as y'all will remember, has a real history to it, right? Have y'all ever seen Ronald Reagan in the 1960s when he was calling Medicare socialism, right? Yeah, you can still find those on YouTube, those ads. At every juncture where we have proposed an initiative that would do right by the American people, whether it was our seniors or vulnerable communities, they have called it socialism. And so in some sense, this is really nothing new. They've been doing it for generations, right? Now, what do we have to do, though, politically? You know, we are in a campaign. We do want to make sure that we're successful. We have to point out what we mean exactly. Right? What we're talking about is nothing that is radical or that the United States has not done before. For instance, when I call for universal higher education, like tuition-free public state universities, community colleges, apprenticeship programs, there are people here who remember, and especially if you lived in one of these states, that just a generation or two ago, a lot of state university systems were tuition-free. In my neck of the, or close to it, in my neck of the woods of Texas, people will tell you that in the 70s or 80s, it was like $50 a credit hour per semester. The University of California system, up through the late 70s, early 80s, was tuition-free. Other states. So I'm going to point out to the American people that we're not doing anything that's radical. What we're doing is that we're investing again in the American people and making sure that they can succeed. Same thing with our healthcare system. I mean, Medicare basically is a program that the government runs, right? Now, I believe that everybody should have access to Medicare. I also believe if you have a private health insurance plan and you want to hold on to that plan, that you should be able to do that. But I do believe that the government has a more robust role to play. And we're going to spend a lot of time pointing out to the American people, to their families, why what we're doing is in the best interest of them. And I would just say also, it was fascinating a few months ago when Representative Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez talked about raising the top marginal tax rate. Remember that the top marginal tax rate up through the 60s used to be 91 or 92%, and then by the time Reagan got in, it was 72%, and then he lowered it very significantly. Right? And there was conversation about, oh, you know, could it go back up to 70%? She did not say that she wanted it to go back up to 70%. She said, you know, that she thought it should be raised. But then they did a poll. Somebody did a poll of Democrats and Republicans about whether you would support raising the top marginal tax rate to 70%. And even 45% of Republicans said that they would support that. And the reason for that is because people are frustrated, again, that we've been asking so little from people at the very top for a long time, and more from them and their families. So he can cry socialism all he wants, but we know that all this is investing in the basic building blocks of a prosperous country and families that can actually get by and prosper in education, in healthcare, in jobs in this country.
Thank you, Carolyn. We've got a little bit of time left here, a little less than a minute. You brought up your mom a lot tonight, and this has been a really well-read conversation with the candidate. People who become president tend to have very strong mothers. So explain what your mom how she has shaped you as a leader.
I wouldn't be here without my mom. First, my mom raised me as a single mother, my brother and me. She worked very hard to support us and to support her mom, my grandmother. And my mom was the first in her family to graduate from high school and then to get to go on to college. She was also a hellraiser. She was involved in women's empowerment issues and Hispanic issues when she was young. And so she raised my brother and me to believe that you can make a difference in the democratic process. And you know, I thank God every single day that I grew up with the mother that I grew up with. And I'll always remember the lessons that she taught me if I'm president.
Secretary Castro, we thank you for joining this conversation with the candidate. Thank you to the audience. Everyone, you can tune in next week for Senator Amy Klobuchar, but until then, have a great night.
Thank you all very much.